The morning mist still covered the fields of Montana when Sarah Fields decided to take her usual morning walk along the dirt road that cut through the properties in the region. The sun had barely risen, and dew still covered the low vegetation that bordered the path. Her thoughts wandered between the day's chores on her small ranch when an unusual movement caught her attention. As she approached, her heart raced. A majestic coal-black horse had fallen by the side of the road, its breathing heavy and irregular. Sarah quickly dismounted from her mare and approached cautiously. The animal, even in its weakened state, exuded a striking presence. Its eyes, though tired, revealed an intelligence that Sarah had never before witnessed in another horse. "Easy, friend," she whispered, approaching slowly. The horse tried to stand, but its legs trembled with the effort. Sarah immediately noticed the signs of mistreatment, the marks of restraint on its limbs, the dull coat, and especially a muscular structure that betrayed training beyond natural limits. Without wasting time, Sarah took out her cell phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. "Dr. Thompson, I need your help urgently. I found an abandoned horse on Oak Road near the old crossing. He's in really bad shape." The veterinarian, known for his dedication to the animals in the region, didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way, Sarah. Don't try to move him until I get there." While waiting, Sarah remained by the animal's side, speaking softly and offering water from her canteen. To her surprise, the horse responded to her voice with small head movements, as if understanding every word. There was something special about him, a nobility that not even his debilitated state could conceal. Dr. Thompson arrived in his adapted pickup truck about 20 minutes later. As he examined the animal, his expression became grave. "Sarah, this horse has been subjected to an intense training regimen and, from what I can tell, substances to enhance his performance. It's a miracle he's still alive." "We need to save him, doctor," Sarah declared with determination. "I can take him to my ranch. I have the space and conditions to care for him." The veterinarian observed the young woman for a moment. He knew that determined look of Sarah's well, the same expression that had led her to transform her small ranch into a refuge for animals in need. "It's going to be hard work, Sarah. He'll need intensive care." "I'm prepared," she replied, without hesitation. With great care and after administering medications to strengthen the animal, they managed to load him onto the veterinarian's adapted trailer. Throughout the journey to Sarah's ranch, the horse kept his eyes fixed on her, as if he knew that this stranger represented his only chance of survival. When they arrived at the ranch, Sarah already had a place prepared in the stable. With Dr. Thompson's help, they settled the animal comfortably with fresh hay and clean water available. The veterinarian left a series of medications and detailed instructions before departing, promising to return the next day. Alone with her new guest, Sarah sat close to him. "You're safe now," she murmured, observing how the animal seemed to absorb every word. "I'm going to call you Thunder. There's something in your eyes, a spark of light that reminds me of lightning cutting through the dark sky." The horse whinnied, softly as if approving the name. Sarah smiled, but her mind was already working on practical matters. Who could have been capable of subjecting such a magnificent animal to such a situation, and why abandon him to die on a deserted road? What Sarah didn't know was that her questions would begin to be answered sooner than she imagined, and that Thunder's fate was intertwined with a much larger plot than she could suspect at that moment. In the weeks that followed, Sarah devoted herself entirely to Thunder's recovery. Each small progress was celebrated as a victory. The first day he managed to stand up on his own when his coat began to regain its shine, the moment he accepted being brushed without showing fear. But it was during a particularly sunny morning that something extraordinary happened. Sarah was in the paddock observing Thunder move with increasing ease when he did something unexpected. Before she could reach for the brush that had fallen from her hand, the horse had already moved towards the object, gently picking it up with his teeth and delivering it to her. The gesture, executed with such precision and naturalness, left Sarah astonished. "This isn't normal," she murmured to herself, observing how Thunder gazed at her with those deep, intelligent eyes. In the following days, she noticed other unusual behaviors. how he responded to commands even before she verbalized them, how he anticipated her routines, how he seemed to understand exactly what she needed at each moment. It was during one of his visits that Dr. Thompson also witnessed this extraordinary ability. "In all my years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything like this," he commented, watching Thunder execute a series of complex movements with just subtle gestures from Sarah. "This horse has something special. Have you thought about discovering his origin?" The veterinarian's suggestion planted a seed in Sarah's mind. That same afternoon, she decided to visit Old Joe, a man who knew every inch of that region and every horse that passed through it. She found him on his small property, sitting on the porch, braiding leather. "A black horse with a white star-shaped mark on his forehead?" repeated Old Joe, his wrinkled hands stopping their work with the leather. His expression changed instantly. "You're talking about Sovereign." "Sovereign?" asked Sarah, confused. The old cowhand put the leather aside and adjusted himself in his chair. That's what they called him at Golden Valley Ranch before they started using him in competitions. "One of the most impressive horses I've ever seen born." Old Joe paused, his face hardening with the memory. "Until Victor Brandon decided that natural talent wasn't enough." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. Golden Valley Ranch was known throughout the state for breeding elite horses, and its owner, Victor Brandon, was a powerful figure in the region. "What happened?" she asked, although she feared the answer. "Victor was always obsessed with results," continued Old Joe, his voice heavy with regret. "When Sovereign started showing extraordinary talent, he saw the opportunity to create an unbeatable champion. It started with increasingly intense training, then came the substances." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "What kind of substances?" "The kind that makes a horse run beyond its natural limits," replied Old Joe, shaking his head. "I saw that horse do things that seemed impossible, but I also saw the price he paid afterward. That's why I left the ranch. I couldn't be complicit in that anymore." The pieces were starting to fit together in Sarah's mind. The state in which she found Thunder, the signs of extreme exhaustion, the marks of restraint. "And no one ever. Should I reported this?" Old Joe let out a bitter laugh. "Report Victor Brandon? In these parts, he's practically a king. Nobody dares to go against him." The old cowhand leaned forward, lowering his voice. "If you really have Sovereign, be careful, girl. Victor won't like knowing that someone is taking care of what he discarded." Sarah felt the weight of that warning, but something inside her strengthened. "He's not Sovereign anymore," she said firmly. "Now he's Thunder, and no one is going to hurt him again." As she returned to her ranch that afternoon, Sarah observed Thunder with different eyes. Now she understood the origin of that extraordinary intelligence, that indomitable spirit that not even mistreatment had managed to break. But she also understood that her battle to protect him was just beginning. The news of the miraculous recovery of a purebred horse spread quickly through the surroundings. In a region where everyone knew each other, it was only a matter of time before the story reached Victor Brandon's ears. The rancher was in his office at Golden Valley when his head foreman brought the information. "Are you sure of what you're saying, Ted?" questioned Victor, his fingers drumming on the solid mahogany desk. "Absolutely, boss. It's that horse all right. John Fields' daughter is taking care of him. The beast not only survived, but is recovering well." Victor slowly stood up, walking to the window that offered a panoramic view of his lands. His eyes scanned the vast fields where dozens of elite horses grazed, each worth a small fortune. But his mind was focused on just one of them, the one he believed he had gotten rid of. "Schedule a visit," he finally ordered. "Let's see this. Sarah Fields." The next morning, Sarah was finishing the morning exercises with Thunder when a luxurious SUV parked in front of her ranch. Her heart raced as she recognized the man who got out of the vehicle. Victor Brandon was an impossible figure not to notice, with his imposing bearing and the characteristic felt hat that never left his head. "Miss Fields," he greeted, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I came personally to congratulate you on the excellent work with my horse." Sarah felt Thunder tense up beside her, his muscles trembling slightly under his now shiny coat. "Your horse?" she questioned, keeping her voice firm despite her nervousness. "Surely you didn't think an animal of this caliber wouldn't have an owner, did you?" Victor laughed, a cold and calculated sound. "Sovereign is one of the best specimens ever born." "At Golden Valley. Unfortunately, we had a setback during his training and he ended up straying. I'm here to take him back." Sarah stepped forward, instinctively placing herself between Thunder and Victor. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brandon, but that won't be possible. This horse was found abandoned in critical condition. If he really belonged to your ranch, you have a lot to explain about the conditions he was in." Victor's smile faltered for an instant. "Miss Fields, I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to compensate you generously for the care provided." He took a checkbook out of his jacket pocket. "Let's say 50,000. It's a considerable amount for a few weeks of work." "He's not for sale," Sarah replied, feeling the strength of Thunder's presence behind her. "He's not a commodity, Mr. Brandon. He's a living being who almost lost his life due to mistreatment." Victor's expression hardened. 100,000. It's my final offer." "No." The silence that followed was as tense as the air before a storm. Victor slowly put away his checkbook, his eyes now cold as steel. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, girl. I'm a patient man, but I also know how to get what I want. This horse belongs to me and I will recover him, with or without your cooperation." Before Sarah could respond, a firm female voice cut through the air. "Any problem here?" Mrs. Laura, a lady in her 60s but with the bearing of a queen, was approaching from the side path. Her perceptive eyes quickly assessed the scene. "Laura," Victor greeted, his tone losing some of its hostility. "I didn't know you frequented this side of the region." "Sarah is like a daughter to me," replied Mrs. Laura, positioning herself next to the young woman. "And I'm very concerned about her well-being and that of her animals." The implicit meaning in the words did not go unnoticed. Mrs. Laura was more than just a local resident. She was a respected figure throughout the state, known for her work in animal protection and her influence in political circles. Victor adjusted his hat, taking a step back. "I just came to make a fair offer for something that belongs to me, but I see we'll need to resolve this through other channels." Turning to Sarah, he added, "We'll see each other soon, Miss Fields." When the SUV disappeared down the dirt road, Sarah finally allowed her legs to tremble. Mrs. Laura hugged her by the shoulders. "You know this horse's story, don't you?" asked Sarah. "I know more than that, dear. I know the story of several animals that passed through Golden Valley, and it's time someone had the courage to face Victor Brandon." Thunder approached, gently touching Sarah's shoulder with his muzzle. It was as if he understood every word of the conversation, as if he knew that his fate was about to become the center of a much larger battle. In the days following Victor's visit, Sarah doubled her efforts on the ranch's security. She installed cameras, reinforced the fences, and started sleeping in the small room adjacent to the stable. Her intuition told her that the rancher's veiled threat wasn't just empty words. During this period, her connection with Thunder strengthened in an extraordinary way. The horse seemed to sense her concerns, offering comfort with his constant presence and surprising displays of affection. On a particularly tense afternoon, after receiving another summons from Victor's lawyers, Sarah was surprised when Thunder brought her old guitar to her, which had been leaning in a corner of the stable. "You remember," she whispered, touched. Weeks ago she had mentioned to him how playing guitar always calmed her in difficult moments. Since then she hadn't played, consumed by worries. "You really understand everything, don't you?" Dr. Thompson, who was closely following the animal's progress, was amazed by his improvements. "It's not just the physical recovery that's impressive," he commented during one of his visits. "It's as if he had developed a unique form of intelligence. Perhaps the substances they used on him affected his cognitive development in ways we don't understand." "Or maybe," intervened Mrs. Laura, who was present, "he always had this potential, but only now, free from mistreatment, can he fully demonstrate it." The lady's observation sparked an idea in Sarah. What if we could show this to everyone? Not just his intelligence, but his true nature. That's how the plan to enter Thunder in a public exhibition was born. Not a traditional competition, but a demonstration of natural horsemanship, where the connection between horse and human was more important than athletic performance. "It's risky," pondered Mrs. Laura. "Victor will certainly be there. But maybe that's exactly what we need." An opportunity to expose the truth in front of everyone. The preparation for the event became a joint project. Dr. Thompson took care of the physical part, ensuring that Thunder was healthy for the presentation. Old Joe, who knew the secrets of traditional horsemanship, was amazed at how the horse responded to Sarah's subtlest commands. "It's not training," Sarah explained, watching Thunder execute a complex sequence of movements with just a few gestures from her. "It's partnership. He doesn't do this out of obedience, but out of trust." One afternoon, while they were training in the small arena, Sarah received an unexpected visit. A young reporter from the local newspaper, alerted by Mrs. Laura about the story, came to do an article. "Is it true that he was found practically lifeless?" asked the journalist, watching in admiration as Thunder performed graceful movements around Sarah. "Yes," Sarah replied, her heart tightening with the memory. "But more important than that is what happened afterward. It's not a story about suffering, but about overcoming, about how love and respect can transform lives." The report, published a few days later, had a strong impact on the community. Even without directly mentioning Golden Valley Ranch, the implications were clear to those who knew the region. Victor, furious with the exposure, intensified his legal pressure, now alleging defamation. "He's cornered," observed Mrs. Laura, reading the documents sent by the lawyers, "and cornered people tend to make mistakes." As if confirming her words, the following night, Sarah noticed suspicious movements near the stable. Thunder, restless, began to whinny in an alerting manner. When she arrived at the scene, she saw two men trying to break the padlock. "Get away now," she shouted while triggering the alarm she had installed. The intruders fled into the darkness, but Sarah was sure she had recognized one of them. It was Ted, Victor's foreman. The next morning, while reporting the incident to the police, Sarah realized that the battle had reached a new level. It was no longer just about the possession of a horse. It was about exposing a system of cruelty that had remained in the shadows for too long. "We need to move up the presentation," she decided, stroking Thunder's neck. "We can't give them time to try something worse." The horse rested his head on her shoulder, in a gesture she knew well. It was his way of saying he was ready, that he trusted her. Sarah hugged his robust neck, feeling the strength and gentleness that coexisted in this extraordinary being. "Together," she murmured, "we're going to show everyone who you really are." The Montana Equestrian Events Center was packed that Saturday morning. News of the special presentation had attracted curious onlookers from all over the region, and the stands were filled with expectant faces. In the temporary stable, Sarah adjusted the final details of Thunder's equipment, opting for a simple set that highlighted his natural beauty. "There are a lot of important people out there," commented Dr. Thompson, approaching with Mrs. Laura. "Representatives from the Equestrian Federation, journalists, breeders, and Victor Brandon," added Mrs. Laura, her gaze serious. "He's in the front row, surrounded by his lawyers." Sarah took a deep breath, her hands resting on Thunder's neck. The horse maintained a surprising calm, his attentive eyes fixed on her as if he wanted to transmit confidence. "It doesn't matter who's watching," she said, more to herself than to others. "Today is about showing the truth." Old Joe, who was helping with the preparations, approached limping slightly. "Girl," he called, his voice choked with emotion, "I want you to use this." In his hands was an old silver bridle, meticulously polished. It was my father's and his father's before him. They said it brings luck and protection. With tears in her eyes, Sarah accepted the gift, carefully replacing the bridle she was using. Thunder accepted the new equipment without hesitation, as if understanding the significance of the moment. When the loudspeaker announced her name, Sarah mounted with grace. The arena was silent when she and Thunder entered, the sunlight making the horse's black coat shine like satin. In the front row, Victor Brandon adjusted himself in his seat, his eyes half closed in an expression of disdain. The presentation began simply: cadenced steps, smooth changes of direction, fluid transitions between different gaits. But soon the audience began to notice something different. There were no visible commands. Horse and rider seemed to move as a single entity, connected by a silent language that transcended traditional training. "Extraordinary," murmured one of the Federation judges, leaning forward in his chair. "Look at the animal's expression. There's no tension, no fear, it's pure harmony." Sarah guided Thunder through a series of increasingly complex movements. The horse responded with impressive precision, his intelligence evident in the way. He anticipated each transition, each subtle change in his rider's posture. In the audience, a young horse breeder nudged her neighbor. "Are you seeing this? He's smiling. Have you ever seen a horse smile during a presentation?" Indeed, there was an almost human expression of joy on Thunder's face, his eyes bright, his ears alert and relaxed. It was the complete antithesis of the terrified and broken animal that Sarah had found months ago. The crucial moment of the presentation was approaching, a liberty exercise where Thunder should work freely, responding only to Sarah's gestures. In the center of the arena, it was something rarely attempted in public presentations due to the risk of the horse losing control. When Sarah dismounted and released the reins, a murmur ran through the audience. Thunder remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on his partner. With an almost imperceptible gesture, she invited him to move. What followed left the audience in absolute silence. Thunder began to move in perfect circles around Sarah, alternating between different gaits with a grace that seemed to defy gravity. His movements were so precise that they seemed choreographed, but the spontaneity in his eyes revealed that each step was a conscious choice, a demonstration of trust and partnership. Suddenly, a strident noise cut through the air. Someone in the stands had dropped a metal tray. Thunder shuddered, his muscles visibly tensing. For a moment it seemed that all the work would be compromised. Sarah didn't move. Instead, she began to softly hum the same melody she used to play on her guitar. The effect was immediate. Thunder's ears turned towards her, his body visibly relaxing. With a fluid movement, he resumed his dance, now with even more expressiveness. In the front row, Victor Brandon stood up abruptly, his face a mask of contained fury. But before he could do anything, he was restrained by the firm arm of one of the Federation judges. "Sit down, Brandon," the man whispered. "What we're seeing here goes far beyond your claims of ownership. This horse is no longer your sovereign. He has transformed into something much greater." The presentation culminated in a moment of pure magic. Thunder, on his own initiative, approached Sarah and bowed in a kind of reverence, his front legs elegantly flexed. The audience erupted in applause, many with tears in their eyes at this extraordinary demonstration of connection between human and animal. The impact of Thunder's presentation reverberated far beyond the walls of the event center. Videos of the spectacle went viral on social media, attracting attention not only from horse lovers, but also from animal behavior experts and animal rights activists. The full story finally came to light. Anonymous documents began to surface, detailing the questionable practices at Golden Valley Ranch. Former employees, encouraged by Old Joe's example, came forward with their testimonies. Victor Brandon's empire, built on cruel practices and unbridled ambition, began to crumble. "It's more than a personal victory," reflected Sarah a few weeks later, watching the sunset from her porch alongside Mrs. Laura. "It's a paradigm shift." The lady smiled, her eyes shining with wisdom. "You and Thunder have proven that there's a better way, that extraordinary results can be achieved through respect and love, not force and cruelty." Sarah's ranch had transformed into a point of pilgrimage. Breeders, trainers, and horse lovers from all over the country came to meet Thunder and learn about the gentle methods that Sarah used. But it was the visits from local school children that touched her heart the most. "How did you know he was special?" asked a little girl during one of these visits, her eyes wide with admiration as Thunder gently accepted a carrot from her tiny hand. "All animals are special," Sarah replied, smiling. "Thunder just had the chance to show it to the world." The transformation of the ranch into an equine sanctuary happened naturally. With the support of Mrs. Laura and a growing network of supporters, Sarah began to receive other rescued horses. Each animal that arrived brought its own story of overcoming, and Thunder seemed to naturally assume the role of mentor, helping the new residents regain their confidence. Dr. Thompson, who continued to be the veterinarian responsible for the sanctuary, was amazed by the interactions. "It's as if he teaches the others that it's possible to trust again," he commented, observing how Thunder gently guided a frightened foal through the paddocks. Old Joe became a constant presence at the sanctuary, sharing his decades of experience with the young volunteers who arrived wanting to learn. "You're witnessing a silent revolution," he would say, his wrinkled face illuminated with pride. "Each animal we save is a victory against the system that saw them only as competition machines." As for Victor Brandon, his fall was as swift as his rise had been. The investigations triggered by the leaked documents led to the discovery of a series of irregularities. Golden Valley Ranch, once a symbol of power and prestige, was transformed into a rehabilitation center for rescued horses administered by a foundation created by Mrs. Laura. On a quiet afternoon, while brushing Thunder's gleaming coat, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The horse, sensing her moment of contemplation, gently rested his head on her shoulder, his characteristic gesture of affection. "You know," she murmured, "when I found you on that road, I thought I was saving you, but in reality you showed me a greater purpose. We saved each other." Thunder whinnied softly as if agreeing. On the horizon, the sun was setting over the sanctuary's fields where other horses grazed. Freely and in peace, it was the beginning of a new era, where true nobility was not in titles or victories, but in respect for life in all its forms. End of story. Dear listeners, the journey of Sarah and Thunder shows us that the greatest transformations begin with small acts of courage and compassion. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to become part of this community that believes in the power of love and respect for animals. Subscribe to our channel to learn about other inspiring stories of overcoming and hope. Leave your like and share your thoughts in the comments. Each word of yours helps strengthen this chain of transformation. And don't forget, just like Thunder, every living being has an extraordinary story waiting to be told. Until next time,